3, 2, 1.
The strongest memory I have of witches is definitely the film of the Roald Dahl book, The Witches, and the Grand High Witch in that. And there's something about the fact that...
Don't their like faces melt off or something?
I think the Grand High Witch, that she has like a mask or something. And it was just, they looked so ordinary that really, really terrified me. And I definitely had a lot of nightmares about them after that. A predominant one for me, I think everyone has this dream to an extent, where I basically dreamt that my mum was a doppelganger. There was a doppelganger that was my mum. I was sitting in my kitchen as a kid. I knew that she wasn't my mum. I was telling her that she wasn't my mum, and she was going, oh no, I am. And she was making a shepherd's pie, which is what we'd eat quite often. But I knew that she was trying to poison me with it.
Yeah.
And
how did you know she was trying to poison you again?
I knew that
it was just intuitive.
No, I knew that there's obviously a soft potatoey layer on top of the shepherd's pie. And I knew that instead of mince, she was using poo.
It's so fucking ridiculous. Well, I still don't understand how you knew it was poo, though.
I just, in dreams, you're just convinced. I was convinced, like, she looked exactly like my mum, but I was convinced she wasn't. And I was just intuitively knew that she was making this shepherd's pie with a base layer of poo.
Yeah.
Instead of mince. And because
was it hot poo?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I guess she was cooking it in.
So I think I remember asking whether you could eat poo to my mum, a scientific young boy.
In real life, not in the dream.
Yeah, and my mum told me that, rightly, that poo was poisonous. So I thought that would be an effective way of dispatching a victim, feeding them poo.
Yeah. So she was killing you with poo.
Yeah.
She made you a poo pie.
Luckily, I didn't eat it.
Thank God. Yeah, luckily. Did she become evil? Like, as in, when you confronted her about the poo in the pie, in the dream, did she lash out?
She didn't lash out at all, luckily. I think the dream ended there. But I know that there is a recurring, in terms of anxiety dreams that people have, like, it's quite common that your teeth will fall out in a dream when you're quite anxious. I think there's one called the old hag dream. Which is like a dream that a lot of people get of like an angry woman kind of thrashing at you. Yeah.
I've had the doppelganger sort of imposter mother dream, but not. I mean, mine was a lot more aggressive. There wasn't any poo being cooked into pies. Basically, I just remember being in bed. In the dream, I was in bed, and I could hear my mum walking around outside the door in the hallway, like on the landing, and then suddenly she just threw the door open and just sort of like rushed me, and I just woke up.
Yeah.
It was my mum, like physically it was my mum, but I knew it wasn't. It was like an evil mother.
They're quite Freudian.
Yeah.
I'm sure Freud would have a lot to say about both of these dreams.
It is
deeply
weird.
Messed up young boys.
Yeah. I never had anything about anyone else being a doppelganger. And to be honest, it's weird that I can probably remember half a dozen dreams, like nightmares, from my whole life. And that's one of them. So it's obviously there was some scarring there.
Absolutely. But we're not here to talk about dreams today, are we?
No.
We're here to talk about witches.
I like that. Really leant into the microphone there. Witches.
So I guess the podcast today is about English witches pretty much. But in order to understand English witches, I think it's important for us to look at witches as a whole.
Yeah. Getting
in and researching this topic, there was only sort of baseline stuff that I really knew about this before. But what I was really hoping to find was like a kind of pagan sort of utopian relationship with magic, where people just used like charms and magic, and there was a point in time where medicine men and cunning men and women were looked upon favourably, or like as a part of the community. And every single society under the sun that has ever existed, from the smallest tribe in like Papua New Guinea to ancient Mesopotamia to the modern day, every single society has had a belief in witches, and pretty much every single one of them looks upon them unfavourably.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because in my mind, it was like the monotheistic sort of religions was the end of the witches. I would have expected those sort of like tribes, for example, as you're saying, like Papua New Guinea, they would look at the witch and the like that sort of character in their worlds as being like good people.
First off is that witchcraft as a concept is basically as old as we have records. It goes back to ancient Mesopotamia, to the Sumerians, to the first civilization ever.
Yeah.
Which kind of blew my mind. I didn't think that it had been around for that long. And witchcraft as we kind of know it today, it's a part of every single society, from small tribes in Papua New Guinea to modern day Africa to Middle Ages Europe to LA. It's like
yeah,
it permeates every single culture, and almost all cultures have some place in their society for a kind of evil doing magic user. One society that is the exception that proves the rule is the ancient Egyptians. Now, the ancient Egyptians had this idea or word for magic that they called Heka or Heka. Mm-hmm. And that was basically like they kind of believed in the force to a certain extent. Magic kind of permeated the world. It came from the gods. Gods obviously had a lot of power, but they needed people or humans on the ground to help enact their will. Mm-hmm. It was kind of not looked upon disfavourably at all that people would be using magic in agriculture, in medicine. You know, that was just part of daily life.
Yeah.
Ancient Egyptians are quite unique in that respect. There's a court case from about 1200 BC where a group of conspirators tried to kill King Ramses. Mm-hmm. And they attempted to do this by using magic, using wax images and potions and things like that, and allegedly deadly spells learned from a book, which was a book in the Royal Library. And sorcery is, you know, listed in the court as the murder weapon. So it very much was a part of like the reality of the day to day. There was no kind of distinction, and
yeah, it was just like accepted. Yeah, you've actually weirdly just triggered, not to go too far off piste. I can't remember the specifics because it was a long time that I was reading about this, but in ancient Persia, during the period of like the great kings of Persia, like Xerxes and Darius, and there was basically, it was common practice for you to kill basically all your siblings. So you would become emperor and then you would kill all your siblings because otherwise your brother might try and kill you, become emperor himself. But there's like talk of magi, and there's also talk of doppelgangers as well. So the Magi might not even be he might not be the original person anymore. But yeah, I don't know, you just triggered something in my mind there. It was just accepted that Magi were like advisors to the emperors of Persia or the king of kings.
There's writings about witches or magi or magicians or whatever. It goes back, as long as we've had history, we've had witches. It seems something that's sort of intrinsic to the human condition, weirdly. I don't know why that is, but that's something that's fascinating to me about this topic.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think a key part to like understanding people's relationship with witchcraft right up until the Middle Ages is that magic and science were interchangeable. Isaac Newton, for example, was as into alchemy as he was into gravity. He wrote books on, you know, the Philosopher's Stone and learning how to transmute lead into gold and that sort of thing.
I had no idea about that.
Yeah, he was fully into it. You had John Dee, who was part of Elizabeth I's court. He was a royal mystic and an alchemist. So alchemy and science, you know, people thought that it was literally possible to turn lead into gold. So where magic kind of falls into that is very, very blurry. Yeah. And I think like when you're looking back over thousands of years, our relationship with magic has always been blurry, but there's always been these figures that have attracted blame. It's very easy to see how you could do that, because you could have a medicine woman or a cunning man or woman on the edge of town who knows a bit about herbs and knows a bit about medicine. It's very basic knowledge, so people are going to die, and who are you going to blame when it goes wrong? Also, they're an easy scapegoat. They're not often tied to the community particularly, and there's very little social payback if it goes wrong when you go for them. There's reports in the pagan Roman Empire of them hunting down witches. They're sporadic reports, but they go all the way up to the 15th, 14th, 15th, 16th century. Now, I think you can see a kind of build-up happen as Catholicism and Christianity as a whole just takes hold over Europe, and the places where you have the most devout thought, the most, I guess, fanatical belief in Christianity, witches kind of seem to follow that. And throughout the kind of early and Middle Ages, you start to get heretics being burnt at the stake, and you start to get this article from the English Heritage website, which talks about the arrival of scholasticism in the 11th century. And scholastic philosophy meant that all of created nature became an object of scrutiny. And people, it's like the sort of birth of scientific thought, basically.
Okay.
And scholastics could create a model which would apply to everything, where they could, kind of the birth of critical theory.
Yeah.
And the sort of the inquisitorial eye began to fix itself on aspects of folklore. That's always going to be a threat to your big sort of monolith of Christianity. So there was this thing of like between the 12th and the 14th century, monks started, going back to dreams again, monks started to get preoccupied with the moral problem of a particular kind of dream, a wet dream.
Of course.
The idea is it sinful to have a wet dream?
I don't think you can blame them.
But is
Poor
it
bastards on having sex.
Blame's got nothing to do with it. Is it sinful?
I feel like everything's sinful in some way for a monk.
There's not really much you can do. They're quite into beer and stuff, weren't they?
Yeah, beer, honey, mead, cheese. Just food, really, isn't it?
Quite gluttonous.
Well, yeah, there is a stereotype there, isn't there? Big fat monk.
Friar Tuck. Bashing people over the head with a turkey leg, is for some reason is in my mind.
That's very niche. I
Yeah.
assume from the Robin Hood animated film.
Yeah. Did he do that? Am I just imagining it? Did that come from somewhere else?
I have no idea. I mean, I haven't watched it in probably 20 years, so I can't remember. I just remember he was a big bear, wasn't he? I mean, he was basically just Baloo the bear, but as a friar. Also, we're digressing. Back to wet dreams. Monks having wet dreams.
Right. So monks reported that their nocturnal emissions were often the result of being pressed or sat on by a human female figure. But obviously no women were allowed into the monastery.
Dirty boys.
So what's happening here? Am I just having a dream? And is it kind of down to your own sort of sinful thoughts? No. It's a witch from the village.
That's fucking great.
And she's projecting herself into your dream. And it's not your fault. You're just a nice monk.
So she's a projection. She's not snuck in and is having sex with the...
The details are hazy.
Yeah.
Often in these texts.
Lucky boy.
Yeah.
Although,
well, not
depends
lucky,
on the witch.
really, because what they kind of believed was that devils were capable of transforming themselves into appearance of females in order to tempt monks into sexual sin.
Sex is sex, though, right? Even if it is with the devil.
So the monks sat round and thought about this, and they kind of, lots of kind of scholastic conversations where they're, weighing out the critical theory of why they're having wet dreams.
I like the idea that this all just came on suddenly. They weren't having wet dreams before. They must have been having the wet dreams for years, centuries.
As they were sitting around and discussing the rights and wrongs of having wet dreams, I can imagine some sort of scientific-minded monk, a pioneer in his field, kind of discussed the idea that demons wanted to produce offspring. And that's why it was happening. That's why these monks were being targeted by witches. What witches were doing and what devils were doing were haunting monasteries so that they could
get knocked up by the monks.
Steal human seed in order to impregnate women with demon children.
Oh, I see. So it's kind of like harvesting spunk from the monks and then distributing that amongst village women.
Yeah.
To have demon babies.
You're with me.
Right.
So that's what they thought was happening.
I can see that. I can see the connection there. If I was like a 13th century monk, I can see how I would come to that conclusion.
It's just a logical pathway in the scientific method.
I can see how you would get drawn along that line of thought, though.
I just think the kind of wild shit that people who are basically locked in a castle by themselves, who have no knowledge of anything.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't. You haven't. Well, you've not had sex before. You're having wet dreams about having sex with a woman. It makes sense that it's the devil tempting you and stealing your semen. And
like this stuff starts to get recorded. You start to get these books called demonologies. And actually, James I wrote a demonology.
Yeah, the
a
famous
kind of
one.
encyclopedia of demons.
Yeah.
And that goes way back to the Sumerians, back to Mesopotamia, where they had these kind of catalogues of demons. It's also something weirdly that we've always had. So as these kind of demonologies start to get written more and more people are writing, to be honest, on all kinds of subjects, the one that seems to kind of tie it all together is in 1486, 1487, is the Malleus Maleficarum, which translates to the Hammer of the Witches. which is an intensely metal name for any book.
It's a great name for a book.
And it was written by a German clergyman called Heinrich Kramer, he was a Catholic. The book was controversial at the time, and even at the time it was considered a deeply, deeply misogynistic text. Now, before this time, witchcraft and magicians of any kind were outlawed by the church. Mm-hmm. They weren't really kind of hunted down particularly. There were cases where people were caught using magic, might have been driven out of town, sometimes were executed. Yeah. But generally people weren't really vigilant and didn't live in fear of witches. And people were using kind of folk magic as part of their day-to-day. They'd hang up, it's quite familiar for us to hang a horseshoe up in front of a door, like, for good luck. That counts as folk magic. And they were doing that for all kinds of things, picking fruit by a full moon because it might be juicy, all kinds of things they believed in. But this book, it inspired some of the most kind of formidable witch hunts that went on across Europe. So not only in England and Scotland, but also in Germany, in Russia, in Iceland, in Spain, in France.
I guess that kind of brings us on to the witch hunters, which is a fun one. I say fun, it's obviously horrific for the people that were killed by the witch hunters, but they are an interesting and frankly just insane group of people. In England, first sort of, as far as I can tell, the first recorded witch hunter is a man called John Darrell. He was a Puritan minister. Puritans always involved in these sort of shenanigans. He was active between 1586 and 1597. It seems like he was termed as like an exorcist. And there's links and crossover between exorcisms and witches, i.e. you might be possessed by the devil and that has been brought on by a witch or a group of witches. The most famous of his cases was the exorcism of an apprentice musician, William Summers. So basically he was having like what we would call a fit, and he was having these fits all the time and it was stopping him from being able to like function day to day. So he came in, he performed an exorcism, the fit stopped, surprisingly, and he was paid, he went on his way, and then the fits returned. So John Darrell came back, accused 13 people of being witches locally, and that's a mixture of men and women, so it's not just female witches being accused. But then he was basically found out as a fraud when Summers came forward, the musician that he was helping with the fits, came forward and basically said that he's been paid by John Darrell to put on the fits and then obviously be cured. So interestingly, after an investigation by the Archbishop of Canterbury, who I didn't really think would engage with local issues around the country, but it seems like it's almost some sort of like Christian man of the law, the Archbishop investigated this, struck off John Darrell as a minister and put him in prison for 2 years. So that's kind of like, that's the original witch hunter that I've been able to find in terms of the timeline in Britain. Where was he from? Derbyshire.
Right, so like it sounds like already that is a story like fraught with finger pointing.
Well, it's mad that basically he's a Puritan minister. He's ordained himself as an exorcist, and then he's accused 13 people of being witches. It's just his word.
And was that in response to him, basically people accusing him of putting it on as a bit of a show, pretending to have an exorcism?
No, I don't think so. I think that everyone believed him to be legit and, he was actually doing a good job until this boy Summers came forward and basically confessed the whole thing was an act and that he was being paid by Darrell to put the whole thing on.
It sounds like there's a bit of a con man link with witch hunting.
Yeah, and I think you see that all over. Well, that's because it's not real. The con is that there aren't witches like performing acts of the devil and stuff, but so anyone who's claiming to be a witch hunter or even a minister who's seen a witch or spotted a witch, I'm sure 99% of the time they're just making it up, and maybe 1% of the time they genuinely believe that they have encountered a witch. It
just doesn't seem like they believe in it, and it seems like they're just out for themselves kind of characters.
I think the witch hunters, I'd say that's definitely the vibe you get. I think there's a lot of people who get dragged along on the journey who are genuinely like ignorant, deeply religious people who are just sort of following these leaders, thinking that they are doing the right thing and they are sort of joining in something that's actually very Christian and very good, and it's rooting out all these witches. But I don't think the witch hunters can fall under that sort of, we were just ignorant and we thought we were doing a good thing. It's like, no, these guys seem pretty malicious in what they're doing. The fact that they're paid for their services as well is like, it's a cyclical sort of, I get paid, I'll find the witches in order to get more money. It's like that's kind of how it's working. So yeah, they don't seem like a very nice bunch, the witch hunters. Also, like, bearing in mind that the ministers or people of the church were educated people, as in you didn't just become a minister, you had to go and be educated. So like, there's a certain level of knowledge they hold that your average peasant doesn't.
Well, they can read for a start.
Yeah. Moving on to probably definitely the most famous witch hunter in England was Matthew Hopkins, aka the Witchfinder General, operating sort of around 1644 to 1647 in East Anglia. There's not a huge amount known of Matthew Hopkins before 1644. He may have been a lawyer practicing around Essex. Even that's disputed. As we go through this little story about Matthew Hopkins, you'll realise that there's not a lot to be liked about him, and he seems to be a liar as well. They think he was born around 1620 in Great Wenham in Suffolk. He was the son of a Puritan preacher. As I said earlier, Puritans are always lurking about when it comes to finding witches. East Anglia at the time was very anti-Catholic and Puritan. That kind of, contributes to the witch panics. People are kind of living in a state of suspicion, and hence the sort of finger pointing at neighbours. It's quite important also to remember that this is during a period of civil war. And I guess that kind of lends itself to, like, on a government level, a lack of control. So, your government and your king are so focused on war with each other that, regionally, areas are looking after themselves. And
well, there's not really a police, is there? There's no police force of any kind. Do you have like a sheriff or something?
So yeah, you've got sort of local justices, which are more sort of investigators of crime, I guess. You'll be brought to the local justice and they'll investigate what's gone on, or they'll serve judgment. But there's not like, there isn't a local team of cops running around trying to sort these things out. So yeah, that's kind of the background in which he's operating. In March 1644, that's when he sort of first pops up as a force for evil. He moves to Manningtree. Shortly after arriving, he meets a man called John Stern, who is coincidentally another witchfinder, although I'm not 100% certain whether he became a witchfinder upon their encounter with each other or whether he was already a witchfinder. But yeah, they jump at an opportunity to get involved in an investigation of a local woman, Elizabeth Clark. She's been accused locally of being a witch, and that she's cursed a local businessman's wife. Having been accused of witchcraft, a lynch mob is formed, of course, bringing poor old Elizabeth Clark to her landowner, a man called, this is a great name, Sir Harbottle Grimston.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Sounds like a big character.
Yeah. I mean, he's the local landowner. What, Harbottle? I've never heard that name in my life.
Big man, big britches.
Grimston gives you an idea of the sort of, the vibe of the guy.
What's going on here?
Lord Grimston.
Lord Grimston to you, lad.
So, just want to give you a bit of a picture of Elizabeth, because this is, like, it all feeds back into these stereotypes of witches. But she's sort of in and around the 80-year-old mark. She lives alone. She's completely impoverished. She's got one leg. She's a widower. Like, she is the most vulnerable person in the village, probably. Like, she's an outcast, effectively. She's poor. She's got one leg. And she's got one leg. It's like, come on, leave the lady alone.
And also, like, this is a point in history, right, where you fall over out of your front door and you're crippled for life.
Yeah, I mean, like, she gets an infection in her leg. Like, that's it, the leg goes. Like, there's not someone who's just going to be like, oh, get some antibiotics for you.
I imagine someone with one leg is even fairly unremarkable at that stage.
Probably. There's probably a lot of people with, like, maimed bodies. But yeah, the fact that she's 80, she's got one leg, she lives on her own, she's poor, she's a widow. It's like, come on.
If anything, she's done incredibly well.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that she's lived to that age in sort of the 1600s, in this sort of a tumultuous time, civil war going on. God, I just feel for her. Poor old woman. Literally, imagine your nan getting dragged by a lynch mob. She's got one leg to go and see Sir Harbottle. So yeah, it sucks. It sucks for her. And now this is kind of where the Manningtree witch trial begins in earnest. So Sir Grimston recommends that she's tried, which, to be fair, sounds very reasonable of him. Doesn't just sort of act out his own justice. And now, surprisingly, at this time in England, torture is actually illegal, which is, I was pretty shocked by that. I assumed torture was just something that happens. The fact that there's sort of laws put in place to stop torture is surprising. Also, like, so unenforceable. But anyway, well, it is unenforceable because they do basically torture her. She isn't allowed to sleep for days. Like, we're talking 3 or 4 days with no sleep. Apparently that's common in these sorts of trials. Hopkins and Stern were observing her throughout this sort of sleep deprivation period. And this is probably my favourite part of the whole Manningtree witch trial. During their observations, they claim to have witnessed her basically summoning all these familiars.
That they were watching this happen.
Yeah. So they're sort of like stood there watching through the window, seeing how she's getting on. I guess also to make sure she doesn't go to sleep. I mean, it's so awful. But this poor 80-year-old woman hasn't slept for days. And these guys are just sort of watching her through the window. And they clearly, they come out, they're like, yeah, so look, guys, we've been watching through the window. We've seen some familiars.
Just complete nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously all just completely made up. I'll just run through some of these familiars that were spotted.
Okay, so I just want to put myself there. I'm sitting by her cell watching this happen through the bars or around the cell.
Yeah.
Okay, she's under observation.
Yeah. And suddenly you see a familiar that she's summoned. It's a white dog with sandy spots.
Okay, not that unremarkable at this stage.
And it's fat with short legs. And for some reason it's called Jarmana. Jarmana. I don't know where they got the name from, did the dog tell them?
It's Jamana.
Jamana, yeah, that's Jamana. Jamana the short-legged dog. The short-legged fat dog.
Was that just someone's dog walking past and she said, hi, Jamana?
It literally might have been her dog in the cell with her. You don't like... That's not... I mean, I don't know. For me, that's not really a familiar. Familiar is like a...
It's pretty pedestrian.
Yeah. Then you've got... then, again, another dog. A greyhound with long legs. You'd argue all greyhounds actually have long legs.
Yeah, again.
Who...
Just a dog in the village.
Yeah. And then you think, oh, what's unusual about that? That's just a greyhound with long legs. But it turned into a 4-year-old boy.
Oh.
And that little boy...
That is... Okay, that is weird.
Yeah, and that little boy has no head.
What?
And he's called Vinegar Tom, which is an awesome name. I actually might call it... Like, when I get a dog...
I can see the thought process of someone explaining to me that they're saying she was visited by familiars. First off, little fat dog. You can immediately see my attention, the judge's attention, waning.
Yeah.
And then you just basically have like a 4-year-old's account of... And then a dinosaur came.
Yeah. Literally. It's like kind of one-upping his own creations. He's like, well, yeah, it's a greyhound with long legs. Not impressed? Yeah, well, it turned into a 4-year-old boy. Still not impressed? Yeah, the little boy had no head.
What's his name?
Vinegar Tom. There's a few others, though. There's a black imp.
Yeah, okay. It's classic.
But no name. The black imp doesn't have a name. There's Newers, a polecat with a large head.
Okay.
Obviously.
Never seen one. So I guess that's kind of remarkable, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen a polecat, and I don't know how big their heads normally are. Also, he doesn't actually say how big the head was, like, just large. That could be, like, 50% bigger than a normal head, or it could be, like, 6 times the size of a polecat.
Of a horse.
Yeah, like, it could literally have been, like, absolutely massive. Why it's called News, I don't know.
Why didn't he do anything?
I don't know. It's weird that, he just observed all these things.
Just observing.
Yeah, they appear to just be writing notes while all these demons are appearing.
What's that one's name? That one's Newis.
Did you catch his name? Yeah, Newis.
What's your name? Giacomo. What is it called?
Germana.
Yeah.
Vinegar Tom as well. I'd love to know where the vinegar comes from. It's like he literally was looking around the room and just like he was like, Vinegar Tom. It's like, did you say that because there's vinegar over there? Like, no.
Absolutely not.
No.
Move on. There was a black imp.
I didn't see that vinegar. There was also a black imp. Then there's Holt. Again, I just love the fact that that they're asking the names of all these things. This Holt is a white imp, smaller than a cat.
Okay.
Yeah. To be fair, I would have assumed an imp was smaller than a cat anyway. In my mind,
It's white imp. How big exactly?
smaller than a cat.
Got you.
Still also, it's fairly vague.
Next familiar.
It's still fairly vague. Then there's... This is really good. White imps. This is not Holt. These are different imps. White imps that went to bed with Clark in the shape of a proper gentleman with a laced band. Sounds like she was having sex with two men, to be honest. How do you know they're white imps if they were in the shape of a proper gentleman? Surely they're just... You saw some gentlemen.
It's the ears. It's the ears and the little tail.
Yeah, little sort of demon tail sticking out the back of their tails.
Busy night in the cell.
So this is word, yeah. I mean, I assume these happened over a couple of days because she was sleep deprived for a while. This one, and these are sort of like word for word the descriptions that I found. 3 brown imps from her mother, but I don't know. Like, I don't know if her mum brought them with her, like, and just sort of offered them up, or whether they flew from her mother's house. But also the fact that from her mother, she's 80, so her mother is presumably dead.
Sent them from beyond the grave.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's the demonic aspect, I suppose. Yeah. Again, and this one really feeds back to what I said about them. I think he was just looking at things in the room. A demonic black rabbit.
Okay. Yeah.
Name? Sack and Sugar. You've seen a sack of sugar and you've named it after that, haven't you, John?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we? Sorry, I know it's not strictly professional, but can we have this conversation in the pantry?
God, he's such an absolute lunatic. And the fact that people are buying this, people are like, "Yep, okay, another one." And then there's just a little list. I'll run through these last few ones mainly just because there's no descriptions. So make up whatever you want. There was Ella Mauser, Pie Wacket.
That was a pig in a hat.
Pie Wacket also sounds like he's seen a pie and thought, pie.
Smash it.
Whack it.
Seen that? That's on the shelf.
Yeah. There's then Peck in the Crown.
Ah, okay.
Peck in the Crown, I'd assume, is a bird of some sort, surely. Well,
man with a bird on his head.
Peck in the Crown. Yeah, maybe a man with like a crow on his noggin.
Yeah.
And then Grizzle Greedy Guts.
Oh, okay, so that's an old man.
That's just a fat old bloke in the corner, I think. Grizzle Greedy Guts.
I think we could be Witchfinder Generals.
Yeah, easily. The fact, like, it actually blows my mind that people were buying this.
Yeah, it's
like local people, like, okay,
it's sort
keep going.
Yeah, it's Prince Andrew level of lying. Just never ever being questioned.
Yeah, exactly.
People must have done. I know people did. Like there was like cases brought against people in certain parts of Europe if you failed to bring up evidence. That's what blows my mind. Is I know that before this period of time, people were. It was difficult to prove sorcery.
Yeah.
But these guys just got away with it, which has got to be down to the Civil War.
Yeah, or like it seems
no one's casting an eye over it.
Yeah, exactly. Like these local justices that would normally sort of be in and around these areas, making sure that things are being kept in some sort of order.
They must have
they're not around.
Yeah.
And all the focus is on the war. And the war drags on for years. So it's like, yeah, you're in a neglected area, basically. You're just being left to your own devices with cretins like Matthew Hopkins running around. So, yeah, Hopkins basically ends up accusing five of the local women in the area of being witches. They are tried at Chelmsford Assize in July 1645. And by the end of the trial, a total of 19 witches were found guilty and executed by hanging. And I guess...
That's a big hit.
Yeah, I mean, it's 19 people. 19 people killed for doing nothing.
Yeah.
Like, it's mad.
I think there were like 500 there or thereabouts witches executed in England during this time. That's a sizable percentage.
Yeah, they weren't messing around. After this, he effectively carries on witch hunting, realises that he can make money out of this, and kind of develops like a group of lackeys, basically. He's got his own little crew. They're known as Seekers.
Entourage.
Yeah.
Entourage of Bellend.
Yeah, literally just people out for a bit of cash. They were known as Seekers, and then they later became known as Prickers. The reason they were known as Prickers is that a surefire way to tell a witch was to cut or prick the accused with a blade or a needle, hence the name. If the prick didn't draw blood, then they're a witch.
Feel like that's a bit open to abuse, that method.
Well, it's generally accepted that the prickers were using
Oh,
pricks.
see, don't be petty, please.
They were using like blunt knives or blunt needles so that it wouldn't draw blood. So you draw a line on the arm, you expect to see blood, no blood, right, there you go, you're a witch.
First thing that you would say, it's like it's totally unexamined, all of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the retractable blade was being used apparently as well, which I was actually quite impressed that they even had retractable blades in the 1600s, but apparently they did. So you'd stick it into them, blade retracts, no blood. What's going on? You're a witch.
That's a joke knife.
That's
a joke knife that you're pricking me with.
It's literally, you've just stabbed me with a toy knife.
There's 7 of us and you're a woman.
Yeah.
Okay.
No chance. And then, to be fair, that wasn't the only method. That's just why they were known as prickers. But they, bearing in mind, torture is illegal. The methods they were using were forced marches and obviously the famous ducking in the water. If you sink, you're fine. If you float, you're a witch. I.e., if you drown, well, you're dead anyway, so we can't really do much about that. But if you float, you're still alive, and the only way you could float is if you're a witch.
That was also that was a co-opted method of justice, quote unquote, for scolds. Did you know this?
No.
So the ducking stool was used to kind of to punish scolds, which is basically women saying things that you don't like.
Yeah.
So that was used as a punishment for that. I don't know whether to death or not.
No.
I imagine sometimes people just got
A bit carried away.
Yeah.
Well, people do.
It's absolutely insane that there was a time not that long ago, really.
Yeah. It's, I keep saying it's nuts. It's absolutely insane.
The depths of stupidity that we're sort of getting to here is quite it's
Yeah, but it's
baffling.
also just like people scared. And I guess you're relieved, right? You're relieved you're not being pointed at. The finger's not being pointed at you, so it's just mob mentality
It's
throughout
absolutely,
history.
yeah.
It's like, well, we'll all point at that person. Great, no one's pointing at me then. Although it actually, in this case, in all these cases, actually, it seems, there actually was a lot of people pointing fingers at other people to try and get themselves off. Like even that, the Chelmsford Assizes where they were carrying out this trial, it started off with 6, ends up with 19 that are hanged and executed. Mainly just because as you progress through the trial, more and more women are pointing fingers at other people. Well, I shouldn't say more than more women. It's men and women. So, yeah, he's got his group of prickers. He's going around the countryside. Also, after the trial at Chelmsford, he claims he was appointed Witchfinder General by Parliament. That wasn't the case. He just appointed himself Witchfinder General. Parliament had nothing to do with
Literally
it.
made up his title.
Yeah, he made it up, but he also made up the fact that Parliament had appointed him as the Witchfinder General, which just wasn't true. Next stop after their successful Manningtree witch hunt was Bury St Edmunds. They had another 18 accused and executed, another 68 executed a few weeks later.
68?
Yeah, using Hopkins evidence. So that's 18, and then a further 68, plus the Chelmsford Assizes, the Manningtree witch trial. So he's racking up a pretty good kill count. And he's basically at 100 now.
Just under a quarter of witch executions at this point are him.
So, bearing in mind this Witchfinder General, in inverted commas, Matthew Hopkins and his crew, they're only active for 14 months. In that time, they're focusing just on East Anglia, but the Civil War has come to an end, for a time at least, and finally serious questions are starting to be asked about Hopkins and his mate Stern. So the pair were publicly questioned by a vicar, John Gall.
Right, okay, someone's serious is kind of
Yeah, which
actually taking them to giving them some vague level of scrutiny.
Yeah, so I mean, I was surprised because I figured if anyone's religious, they're a minister or whatever, they're just going to back the witch hunters. But actually, this guy John Gall was writing a book, Select Cases of Conscience Touching Witches and Witchcraft. Basically, he was attempting, very, grateful that someone was trying to do something good, but he was attempting to settle all the sort of hysteria that was popping up all over East Anglia. So he's one of the good guys. He's writing about the Witchfinder General, Matthew Hopkins, in this book, So people are starting to hear about, other theories, i.e. that it's all made up. There's also a group of local justices, which, as we were talking about earlier, because of the Civil War, these justices weren't available, or at least they weren't available in the numbers that they should have been. So the Civil War's come to an end for a period. Local justices start appearing again, and they're questioning the methods. And actually, at one point, they even question whether Matthew Hopkins himself is a witch.
Right. How does it feel? Hey?
Well, as I said, they're only active for 14 months, and the reason they stop is because of this. Suddenly they're like, the gig is up.
Yeah.
People are asking questions, people are writing
Everyone's
books.
back.
Yeah, order is being restored, and by order being restored, the hysteria is dying down, and the opportunity for them to make money out of these witches is dwindling. By 1647, Hopkins and Stern had retired, and Hopkins actually died of, they think it was tuberculosis in 1647 in the summer. So he has a whirlwind tour of East Anglia, kills many, many people, and then retires when he starts being questioned and dies. So, yeah, over a very short period of time, he causes so much chaos.
I wonder if he had lived longer, whether he would have been taken to task or not.
I figure that's kind of what happened. He was confronted by a group of justices. He knew the game was up. If he had carried on, he knew he probably would have been tried on some level. And if he had lived longer, maybe it would have come back to bite him. But it's hard to say.
He kissed a badger and got TB.
Yeah. Wow.
I believe.
TB. I imagine that's a pretty horrible way to die. I actually don't know what it's like to... I have no idea what TB is like, but hopefully it was pretty savage.
It's what you get in Red Dead Redemption, isn't it?
Is it? Yeah, maybe it is.
You get TB?
Yeah, maybe.
It's a lung thing, isn't it? It's just like...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty grim. I don't feel sorry for him.
No, I don't feel sorry for him at all. I mean, John Stern seems to have gotten away with it, though. His mate. He did.
Do we know what happened to John Stearns?
No, I mean, he might have died, but there's nothing about him
I think he definitely died.
There's nothing about him being tried. So he retired to Bury with... It's quite sweet that him and Matthew Hopkins retired to Bury together, though.
Yeah, sweet in a very evil way, yeah.
Sort of like, I don't know, I've got sort of like a Pinky in the Brain idea of them just sort of pottering around like the house in Bury. Anyway, before he dies, he takes the opportunity to write his own book on witchcraft, The Discovery of Witches. And this is basically like a handbook on how to find witches.
This is a big one.
Yeah.
This is like one of the big books after Malleus Maleficarum.
Yeah. So obviously, like, we know about the New England witch crazes, the famous one being Salem. People in that area, in New England, were using A Discovery of Witches or The Discovery of Witches as like a handbook. So he's directly affecting, he's effectively killing more people. Even though he's dead, he's leading to more deaths.
And a lot of those people who settled in New England, in Salem, in Springfield, all over the northeast coast, they were all from East Anglia.
Yeah, lots of them, yeah.
And they would, they'd take these...
And they're all bloody Puritans.
Take these kind of bullshit texts along with them.
Always the Puritans. The estimated earnings in the 14-month period, this is mad. It's anywhere from £300 to £1,000, depending on which source you read or how they want to add it up. But bear in mind, at the time, £10 was the average salary. So say they earned the top end of that as £1,000. In modern terms, that's, like percentage-wise, you're talking about £3 to £4 million in modern day cash in 14 months, just going around executing people based on like bullshit prick tests and retractable knives and like Vinegar Tom and the polecat with a big head, all this stuff, and he's making literally millions of pounds.
Of like nearly 100 deaths.
Well, actually, on that, as you were saying, they reckon it's like something about 500 people executed in England for being witches, and that's over centuries. Hopkins and Stern alone were responsible for somewhere between 200 and 300 executions. So in 14 months, they're literally they're responsible for like 40% of all deaths due to like execution for witches in England.
So when we're talking about the English witch hunts, really everything else is kind of a side note to these two guys.
Yeah, which I guess is why it's so famous. The Witchfinder General is so famous. It's just insane that they were able to get away with it, like just going around the towns.
And it just also, responsible for many more with the writing of Discovery of Witches. Basically creating a little handbook, spotter's guide to hunting witches.
Yeah.
I think it's something we should definitely look at in the future in terms of witches, we should definitely look at American witches because it's such a beast unto itself. And not only that, but we've got about 500 people death count roughly in this period in England.
Yeah.
Scotland's double that.
Is it? Well, Germany's mad, isn't it? It's like 1,000.
Yeah, I think Scotland's around 1,000, and Germany's.
I mean, 1,000 people alone. 1,000 people were executed in Bamberg alone, in Germany.
I think we should definitely look at witch trials and witch hunting or witch culture in different countries at some point, because New England's its own beast, which is very much informed by the times that we're talking about now. In Scotland, whilst there was a lot of people tried and executed, a lot of them were tried and not executed.
That is interesting.
A lot of people were found not guilty. In Iceland, one of their methods of trying people was basically if you could get 12 mates to say that you're all right.
As long as you're not like an arsehole, you probably will get away with being found not guilty. Because you'd assume most people have got 12 friends.
Well, yes, except you're in Iceland in the 15th, 16th century. So maybe 12 people.
Can you use your own family?
There probably are 12 people.
Yeah, but like, if you're allowed to use family members, you're probably all right. But yeah, there probably are quite a lot of small little communities where it's like a handful of houses. Nowadays, piece of piss. Get 12 people, give you a thumbs up, job's good 'un. Bizarrely, the rules under King James were such that witch trials were allowed to take place, but they took place without the normal safeguards you get at a trial. So
a free-for-all, legally speaking.
Yeah, it is effectively a free-for-all. So like, it's fine, you're allowed to have witch trials, but you don't have the safeguards. I think this is just brought on by sort of King James's own paranoia about demons and stuff. He was like, well, let's remove any safeguards because when it comes to witches.
He was a deeply paranoid monarch.
Yeah.
He got the boat over from Denmark and was totally convinced there was a storm on his way back from Denmark, and he had seen witch hunting culture there.
Yeah.
And there was a storm on his way back, and he came back totally convinced that witches had cursed his ship.
Tried to knock him off.
Absolutely. He comes back and he writes his own book on demonology.
Which I guess, yeah, it all links back to the fact that witch trials are allowed without safeguards, because he's obviously an absolute nutter. One of the safeguards you get in the trial is that only adults can give evidence, which makes sense. Like, kids just make shit up, right? Well, not in a witch trial. Children are allowed to give evidence because there's no safeguards. So after these witch trials, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, I touched on it when I was talking about Matthew Hopkins, the widespread fear and panic around witches and witchcraft, it started to subside basically within like a decade of Hopkins' reign of terror. The end of the Civil War in 1651, that played a big part. Relative political stability around Europe, that also seemed to contribute. It's sort of a less volatile and more strongly governed sort of region. There was less food scarcity because, trade was open again after wars. There's less disease. It's just everything lends itself to a more stable sort of like religion and culture, and people were in less turmoil, I guess. So you start to see a really quick drop off. So acts against witchcraft had basically been repealed by the government in 1736. So a good century later, but from that period on, witch hunts, executions, they're pretty rare around Britain. But like, they did still continue. There's an example I found of an elderly deaf-mute fortune teller. I mean, that's a tough ride in the 1800s.
What are you doing? Pointing?
Deaf-mute and also somehow a fortune teller. Like,
I suppose you can do tarot cards, right? Read palms. You can't say anything.
Yeah, you can just sign and you can see. Yeah, like, it's so open to interpretation if all he can do is like point and sign.
Perfect fortune teller.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, he was known as Dummy. Yeah. So
out of order.
Like, there's absolutely thing is, he wouldn't know. Like, what, if you say your name is Dummy, maybe you could lip read. But anyway, he was known as Dummy, which is just so completely uncalled for. But, I think it was a hard life. He already had a hard life. I doubt he cared about his name being Dummy. So this was in Essex, in Civil Hedingham. A mob beat Dummy with sticks, threw him in a river, locked him away in a workhouse where he died of pneumonia. I mean, they really went to town on him. They beat the crap out of him with sticks, and then they threw him in a river. And then he obviously was still, alive and well. So they dragged him out of the river, and then just put him in a workhouse and locked the door. Obviously, I guess he was just died of pneumonia from being wet and cold.
That's horrific.
It's like,
It's just he's so also such a low
vulnerable.
point and vulnerable in society anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it shows what people are capable of even quite a long time down the line.
I mean, this is 1863. This is, it's 150 years ago. It's like, that is a long time ago, but it's also like not that far away.
Yeah.
People were, feel for dummy. That's all I'm saying.
R.I.P. Dummy.
R.I.P. dummy. Poor bastard. And the punishment for it is so lenient. They gave the accusers 6 months hard labour for murdering someone, literally murdering someone. So yeah, they got away pretty lightly. So that's pretty much it from me. Have you got any more?
I do have one story, actually a very recent witch story, and this is actually only from a couple of days ago.
Hit it.
Okay, so this is from the Mirror a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. This is 2023 story.
Great publication. Why were you reading the Mirror?
I was looking for news stories on witches.
Okay, sorry, yeah, of course.
Gemma Collins calls on witches to help cure her as she believes she's cursed.
Understandable.
Gemma Collins told her podcast listeners she feels like she's cursed, but opened up on being powerful enough to break it.
Hang on, why is she asking for help if she's powerful enough to break it?
Look, if you're going to look for holes, that's not why I'm sharing this story.
I will find them.
Gemma Collins admits she feels cursed but believes there are witches out there who can help her. The former Towie star, aged 41, took to her podcast to discuss spirituality when she made the claim. At the start of the recording, she had quickly paused procedures to answer a call. Irrelevant detail there. After the chat with her mum's carer, Gemma discussed it with listeners of the Gemma Collins podcast. She said, "I swear, guys, I've been cursed, but I'm going to come back to that. But I'm powerful enough myself to break the curse. I've got witches all over the UK and the world that can get on a Zoom call when I need them." Gemma jokes that they can't come on their broomsticks before thanking technology for bringing them together.
Good banter, like that.
"We all get on a Zoom and do some creative energy flying around, and we just pell the negative energy," she added. She had previously admitted she is secretly a white witch who can talk to the dead. In 2019, she claims she sees ghosts all the time and is able to communicate with them.
She is really... I mean, this is not where I saw this going at all.
No. She said at the time, "I'm actually a white witch. I can do tarot cards and all that. I need to talk to some TV producers about doing my own show on it.
And all that.
My dream show is to have this haunted house and get some celebrities in there, and then I can do their tarot cards and speak to the dead with them."
I feel like that's already a TV show. Wasn't it with like Derek Acora and they get like a celeb in?
I'm sure GC can give a fresh take on it.
Mate, it would be quite... I actually would watch it though.
Well, she's clearly magical. So that brings us up to the modern day witch.
Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate you. That is English Witches. There is nothing else to know about it.
It couldn't be a more expansive topic. So I think if you have anything that you feel like we've missed or some interesting thoughts of your own, please do email in.
Cheers for listening to us two ramble on about witches on the Folklore, Myth and Legend podcast.